Hello and welcome to the start of a new little mini series I want to do on this channel. So, as you can see on the chalkboard behind me, I want to take a look at the Quintessential Quintuplets, and basically, for some background context, I've seen the show and the movie, but I've never read the manga, so I thought it would be fun to take a look at the series as a whole, but especially the manga, and kind of go volume by volume and basically just look at it as a piece of literature, take a look at its literary devices, its storytelling, characters, tropes, archetypes, etc. And yeah. As for my context with the actual series itself and why I picked it, when I first started getting into literature and started to think, maybe I want to get an English degree one day, I was reading some YA books that really stood out to me. So two of the big ones was The Perks of Being a Wallflower and Looking for Alaska. But I also read like Catcher in the Rye and all of the other John Green books and stuff like that. But Looking for Alaska and The Perks of Being a Wallflower really stuck with me in a way that, when you finish a really good series, you sort of get a post-series hangover and you keep thinking about the characters and the plot and stuff like that. Those two books were one of those where after I finished it, I just kept thinking about it, and I felt like I missed the characters so much, but I also sort of felt a bit haunted by their plots and their endings and stuff. I won't get into their details and spoil anything, but they stuck with me for a really long time, and I kind of had that feeling of one day, it'd be kind of cool to write something like that. And so that sort of was one of the main factors into why I decided to pursue an English degree. So then flash forward, several years, I've already now gotten my English degree, and only a couple months ago I saw the Quintessential Quintuplet show. One of my friends really liked it and wanted to watch it with me, so we did sort of a watch along, and it was sort of the first time since reading those other two books that I got that sort of haunted post-series hangover feeling. And so I thought, it'd be kind of fun to take a look at the manga and maybe get some closure. I've heard that it adds some, bonus content and context and things like that. So I'm really interested in checking it out and seeing, how it alters how I feel about the anime and what else we can glean from the story, etc. But yeah, so for this episode, I thought it would be fun to basically go over what I remember from the show, what I thought about it, my favorite parts, what I didn't like, and things like that, so we can sort of create a baseline of where I stand in relation to the show. So, that being said, this is your spoiler warning. In a few seconds, I'm going to be spoiling the entire show and the movie, and I feel like this is one of those shows and stories that is, it's best to go in without any spoilers, because it's sort of, the stakes are based on mystery, and the tension is sort of based on mystery. So if you aren't familiar with this series yet and you want to see it, please feel free to click off. But otherwise, I think we can start to get into it. I want to sort of do a total sort of debrief on it. So let's jump right into that. All right, so that sort of spoiler warning aside, we can now sort of jump into this and trying to figure out where to even start. So, I guess for starters, I want to say I really, really enjoyed this series. as I mentioned in the intro. It reminded me a lot of some of the YA books that I really enjoyed when I was growing up. But in general, I felt like it was like a very interesting, romance story. I liked that it had all of this other tension and mystery of, who was the girl he knew when he was a child, and who dressed up as, I think her name's Rena, who claimed to be the girl who he knew as a child, but, is actually one of the sisters, basically in disguise. And also, who is he going to end up with? So, it's like, who is, the childhood friend? Who dressed up? Who is wife? Because as we go through the show, they keep doing jumps between this past when they're all in high school, and then when they're adults and he's going to get married to one of them, but they don't let us see who the bride is. So that's one of the main tensions of, we know that he's going to get married to only one of them, and we're trying to figure out as we go through the plot who that person is going to be. So that tension of these questions was really interesting and kind of kept me intrigued, where in other shows, you kind of can wane in interest, etc. But pretty much by the end of every episode, I kept trying to speculate with my friend while we were watching this and guess who it was going to be at the end based on what we learned from that episode, because they do a pretty good job of leaving little, hints and stuff like that. Beyond that, I also just really liked all of the characters. I thought they were all really interesting and unique, and it was like they were really compelling, and so it was fascinating sort of getting to look into the study group. And there was also sort of like a cozy vicariousm where it was like, it seemed like it would be sort of fun to have a large study group like that, and the girls are all rich, so Futaro gets to hang out in like this really cool apartment building that they all live in, and so it kind of has that degree of escapism to it as well. And the music's also really good. I really liked the sort of like opening animations and things like that. And that being said, sort of the main reason I wanted to even do this whole series is I personally felt really unsatisfied by the ending conclusion that we get from the movie. And this is going to be sort of all over the place, but I kind of want to get all my thoughts out as to why I was unsatisfied by that, because I'm hopeful that over the course of the book series, I'll start to get more context and, some cutscenes that might make the ending feel more satisfying. Because as is, I know that with this series, it's sort of a big thing that everybody has a different girl that they're sort of rooting for to quote unquote win. It almost feels like it's like a Bachelor series. I was on Team Miku, and I want to sort of dissect why I was, and why I was so frustrated that Miku was not the girl who was chosen in the end. A lot of my reasons why I liked Miku is sort of from a literary perspective, and also sort of like a storytelling perspective, because I felt like Miku got a lot of the big standout moments that felt like it wasn't just, a cute moment between characters, but actually felt like it was leading to character growth and character development in such a way, and also like relationship development between her and Futaro that we don't get from the other characters. So some of those moments was that, she's constantly working on self-improvement, which seems to be something that Futaro admires a lot, because he has kind of been pulling himself up by the bootstraps. His family is dealing with a lot of poverty, and so he works pretty much relentlessly to try to build himself a better future and eventually rise up out of that. So All of the girls work on like studying, for example, with varying degrees of success, and some of them have big character growth moments, like Ichika learns that she wants to be an actress, and even though it's sort of scary, she ultimately pursues this dream. And Itsuki sort of, she pursues, this sort of conflict with, her mom and maybe wanting to be a teacher. And Nino also just sort of learns that it's okay to sort of be alone. And, if the girls sort of separate, learns to be okay with being alone and sort of growing independent of this sort of like clan that they've built for themselves. But Miku, she doesn't just aim for self-improvement in terms of her studies, and it isn't just also in terms of learning to be more outgoing, but she also, pursues cooking and baking, and so there's multiple times in which she's improving herself. She's improving herself with being more outgoing, she's improving herself with baking, with her studies, etc. And so as one angle, I feel like her sort of self-improvement arc feels like it would go well with Furuo's sort of interests as a character and sort of his own sort of like motivations. We also get, though, some like pretty sweet and tender moments where, for example, she's the first one he seems to recognize. And so what that means is in the show, they're all like, they're quintuplets, so they're all identical, but they have different features to themselves, so the audience can sort of tell the difference. Like they'll have iconic accessories, etc. But within the lore of the show, they're supposed to still look like fully identical. And so it sort of is like there's sort of this like mythos of if you recognize one of them and you're able to say who they are, even when they're not with their accessories, etc., it means that you sort of have love for them. And she's the first one that he, recognizes and is able to say, oh, well, you're Miku. And it's filmed like this really significant shot. She runs over and hugs him and they fall on the ground and there's all this sunlight pouring onto them, and it feels like a very like significant moment rather than, again, just sort of like a cute flirty moment. So there's that. There's the fact that the show itself ends on a date between them, where all of the other girls basically admit defeat peacefully, and they're sort of like, well, she ultimately deserves to win, and they all come to peace with it, which we'll see with the real ending is not the case with the other girl. When the other girl who wins, quote unquote wins, it causes like a ton of fights. So there's that. There's also the fact that in several moments throughout the show, whenever people learn that Furuo might not be able to help them study or might not be able to hang out with them anymore, the camera always pans to her. And we get sort of her reaction, in which she seems the most like bothered by the fact that she's not going to see him again, while the other girls are sort of like, oh, that's a bummer. She's the one who, it seems like her world's collapsing around her. We also see they kind of have like this they have like cute moments that feel bigger than other moments. Like there's a whole thing where they basically like snuggle and sleep in the same bed, which is like depicted as a very like tender moment rather than a comedic moment of like, oh, that's so wacky that he had this flirty moment with someone. At first it's seen as being silly, but then it quickly becomes a very tender moment, and he also sort of covers for her with all of this sort of like scandal that ensues, let's say. there's those moments. She's also the first he kind of truly wins over with the whole joining the study group, because Yotsuba sort of just goes along with it kind of, but then she gets distracted and leaves quickly. Miku is the first one who like consistently joins the studying. And while the other girls come and go based on their conflict with him, again, she's pretty much the only one who consistently stays once she's joined this study group. And within the lore of the show, that's sort of seen as being this like big thing. So yeah, there's all that. Also the fact that their whole relationship is sort of based on a shared interest in history and studying, etc. And then in the movie, I feel like they only crank this up more because again, the show itself, the actual last episode is him and Miku the whole time. And then they do this really weird thing. So I've been sort of like avoiding saying it, but Yotsuba's the one who wins, quote unquote, and so he ends up with Yotsuba. But then we jump forward in time to the wedding, and all of the girls, we get to see like where they are. I don't remember if it's 5 years or however long it's been, but there's like a jump ahead in time, and we get to see where they've all been. And Miku is working at Futaro's dead mother's cafe, so there's sort of like a sentimentality to that, and which again feels like a closer connection than we get with like Yotsuba. But then there's this moment where they all dress up in wedding dresses to see once again if he can tell who is who, so if he can actually pick out which one is his wife, thus proving that he truly loves this person. So the thing with this is if this is so important that he's able to tell who it is, I want to remind everybody again that he's kind of already done this game, specifically with Miku. He's already had this moment with her, so this feels like a repeat of that just to let Yotsuba have the win. And then, in addition to that, there's this moment where Miku hugs Futaro after he's able to identify that, you know, she's Miku. And she like starts crying and basically says some line, I don't remember the exact dialogue, but it's along the lines of her saying like, I'm sort of scared because it feels like things aren't going how they're supposed to be. Which has always haunted me as a moment, because it almost feels like it's like a fourth wall break where the character of Miku is the one he's supposed to end up with, and she's like, you know, semi-aware of this, but for whatever reason the story went a different direction, and so she feels like quietly disturbed by the fact that like she's in the wrong timeline. And in general, since the movie is played out in such a way where it kind of breaks it up into different parts with each girl, it almost feels like it's creating a large multiple choice question. And it kind of reminds me in video games where you can make different choices, and in the video game you can get different endings, and some endings feel more like correct or canonical than others, and other ones are just sort of interesting, and then there can also be like bad, sad endings or evil endings, etc. And when I was watching the movie, I just kept being bothered by the fact that I felt like I was seeing an alternate ending rather than actually getting to see the canonical one. Because, you know, with the other girls, you know, I basically can better see him with almost every single girl than Yotsuba, because of the main thing being is that like the main argument for Yotsuba is that she's fun and he can laugh and have fun with her, but we see him having fun with all the other characters. He doesn't explicitly always have to say, oh, that made me laugh, but he's clearly not miserable hanging out with them. But meanwhile, the other girls, like Miku, her cooking and baking, not only is a sweet thing, but it also reminds him of his childhood and brings back fond memories of his own mother and stuff like that. And he admires her ability again to do all the self-improvement. And again, all the other girls are totally okay with the fact that Miku wins at the end of the show. But when Yotsuba wins, her and Nino get into like a massive fight, and Ichika and Itsuki kind of handle it better, but they still don't handle it great. But the fact that like Nino was totally fine with Miku winning, but there's this really funky thing where right after Futaro picks Yotsuba, it creates like this massive fallout in this, in the quintuplets group, and the girls kind of stop hanging out with each other. They have this conflict, and Miku has to sort of like mend things between Yotsuba and Nino, and it's just like a really funky ending where it sort of feels again like you're playing a video game. You picked the wrong dialogue option, and now you have to watch as all the friend characters sort of break apart from one another. While we saw that had he stuck with Miku, things would have been peaceful and amiable, etc. And I don't know, I just felt, and then the fact that when he picks her, she sort of runs away, and it's not like this warm embrace moment. And I get that that's coming from her having, sort of like self-confidence issues, let's say, feelings of inadequacy. But the other thing that's sort of weird is I kind of felt like when we finally get, quote-unquote, her backstory, I feel like it's like a very not likable backstory. Because basically, it says that she met Futaro when they were kids. They both made a promise to each other that they would turn their lives around and get really good at studying so they could, improve the lives of their families and those they care about. Futaro proceeds to do this and holds up his end of the bargain. Yotsuba, however, pretty quickly kind of rage quits when she's, faces struggles. She gets some obstacles, she struggles with her studies, and just kind of quits because things got hard, and instead of, confronting that challenge, she runs away from it, just like she runs away from Futaro. And then we see that she just sort of starts to distract herself by doing sports because she's good at sports. But we also then see her doing that later in the show when she's in high school, and it's seen as a bad thing because Futaro will then go and be like, hey, you got to stop playing basketball or promising to help all of these people. You need to focus on your studies. So he clearly sees that as being a bad thing, and it's seen as a positive influence by Futaro that he then goes on to encourage her to study and to stop distracting herself. But in her backstory, she does that, and then ultimately she's sort of like, I think she becomes like some sort of athletic trainer or athlete. So there's a weird sort of conflict between her discovering what her real passion is, which is, being athletic and doing sports. But that conflicts with this other theme of she needs to stop running away from conflict and distracting herself, and also helping out others with sports even when she should be studying and things like that. But then we also see that then all of her sisters go to try to support her, and I believe it's Miku who says like, hey, if you want any help studying, I can. And Yotsuba snaps at her, says that she's better than all of the other sisters and that she doesn't need any of their help, and further distances herself from her siblings. And I think she's also the first one to start wearing a bow to try to stand out from her sisters. And then she's ultimately she fails out of school, and she's the reason they all have to switch schools, and then conveniently switching the school with Futaro. And to get that so late in the story, it sort of feels again like it's kind of not a very admirable, it doesn't make you really want to cheer this person on. Not because she struggled with school, but because of the way she sort of handled it all. And again, the way that she handled it is seen as a bad thing in the plot because Futaro fixes that. But then it's also kind of shown as being like, well, she wanted to be independent or something like that. But it's weird because then it sort of feels like she's just like, yeah, you did all this amazing stuff, Futaro, and I didn't. So we shouldn't be together. And then he just kind of is like, no, I want to be with you. But also throughout the entire show, I feel like we don't get a lot of time with these two characters. Again, the show ends on this like long date episode of him and Miku, and we also see a lot of him and Ichika, where she has her whole actress plot, and they get locked in to like a supply building thing for a long time, and there's like a lot of time dedicated to them doing this and her whole actress thing, etc. And so it also just sort of felt like basically I'd almost forgotten that Yotsuba was even in the running. So that's why I'm hoping in the manga we get to see her developed more, maybe some more moments between her and Futaro, because the reason why I'm sort of so annoyed by it is it reminds me of sort of like the big writing thing that was on the scene at the time when this came out, which was like subverting expectations. And I feel like Game of Thrones sort of did it to death, for example, where it's constantly just doing shock things to happen to subvert your expectations, or they purposely build up red herrings, etc. And I feel like that's slowly, hopefully, going out of vogue a bit right now, because I'm a little fatigued by it. And this show felt like that, where they built up all these red herrings, and then it's just like, nope, it's the girl you were the least expecting. So, because the other thing that's weird is, and this is like a super meta read, but Itsuki, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I kind of called everybody different colors or code names when I was watching this. I'm pretty sure I called Yotsuba Carrot because she has a carrot's color scheme, and then Miku was headphones for a while, and Nino I just remembered for whatever reason, and then I called Itsuki Star, and I called Ichika, I think I just called her the actress one, or the short pink-haired one. If you see my other movie reviews, etc., I'm really bad with character names, because I kind of think I tend to think of them more based on sort of the like trope or archetype they fit into / basically their role in this story. But anyway, weird thing about Itsuki is that she is weirdly like always depicted as what you would mainly expect as being the main character. Like in all of the poster artwork, she's like usually in the center, or if you're to do the sort of perfect ratio with the whole like snail shell thing, she's always there. And the fact that she actually has the color scheme of her mom, and / like she almost feels like she has the only true color scheme of like what the quintuplets probably look like in quote unquote real life, since they're all identical. And I just feel like also I've seen a couple other anime where I feel like the big thing is whoever the protagonist teams to sort of like bicker with is the one he ends up with. And there's some really significant moments with them, especially in the beginning, where he sort of starts off on a rough note with her, and she's sort of the first one he bumps into, and then they keep bickering and fighting, and they have this big fight on a bridge. And I swear during the fight on the bridge, I swear he had like a light bulb moment where he thought he was going to start to do like reverse psychology, where he realized like, if I argue with her about how much I don't want her to join the study group, she'll join it, but then it doesn't go that way and she just gets more and more mad. So I was fully prepared when I was watching it for her to win, and it was one of those where it's like, I want Miku to win, but it seems like Itsuki is probably like the canonical ending, because again, she's always like in the front of the posters, in the center, and in the like opening and closing animation, she's always sort of like given more attention. And like again, like in terms of when you're like framing a shot, there's like this whole like rule of thirds where you want to put your subject where the lines cross. I swear she's always in those like where your eye goes to moments. So she had that, and then Nina was the first to confess, if I remember correctly, and so I didn't totally think she would win just because they didn't have much chemistry beyond that, but at least she had that going for her. And Ichika actually also met him when she was a child on that first day with Yotsuba. He didn't realize that they were quintuplets, so he thought he was with the same girl the whole time. But it is worth mentioning that she did that. She sort of becomes like the villain, quote unquote, through a lot of the plot, because she starts to lie and do more malicious stuff to try to win the game, quote unquote. But I still would have been more satisfied with her winning, because even though she does bad stuff, her and Futaro are always kind of able to have these moments where it feels like they're able to talk to one another in a more honest way. But yeah, the fact that it, like, the girls all had to, like, boost up Miku and they're all cheering him on, if anything, it feels all the more malicious that Yotsuba was doing all of this to sort of boost up Miku and try to get Miku to get with Futaro, when she kind of knew in her own heart that she would ultimately try to sabotage it, especially since we know that actually she ran up and secretly kissed him at one point, where he didn't know which girl it was, or at least he didn't reveal to the audience which girl it was. So the fact that she did that and then still tried to, like, boost up Miku feels really malicious. It sort of feels like if your best friend wanted to ask a girl out and you knew that that girl already had a boyfriend, but instead of telling your friend, like, oh, hey man, I hate to break this to you, but she has a boyfriend, instead you're like, yeah, you should ask her out, yeah, you should, like, get flowers and dress up and do this huge big event to ask her out, and it's just setting him up for humiliation. And it sort of felt that way because, again, like, she kissed him, and she knows that she knew him as a child, because for a while it seems like the girls, if any of them were the girl he met, because there's sort of this other, like, Rena girl who is sort of a red herring because she doesn't actually exist, but none of them claim to know him when he was a kid. So, but she actually does know the whole series that was her. So there's just this kind of, like, weird, quiet maliciousness to it. And again, not to beat a dead horse, but I just feel like that ending movie, when we get the post-time skip, I feel like Miku kind of has such a sad ending, in that she's just working at this bakery that is, you know, the old bakery of the mom of the boy who rejected her, and she's just doing that. And it seems like she initially got into baking just to sort of win Futaro over, and then kind of learned to love it, but it seemed like it was still mostly based on trying to win him over. And then I said when she hugs him when he's getting married, she's so, like, still torn up about the fact that she didn't get picked, and she's had years to get over it now and still hasn't. And that's kind of, like, just depressing. And I think also, since Miku feels like she's sort of built to be the most, like, codependent on Futaro, which, like, you know, isn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but it's just depressing knowing that she, like, feels like of all the characters she needs Futaro the most, because Yotsuba seemingly, like, had gotten over Futaro during all those years when she was just playing basketball and, like, completely forgot about her whole promise to this boy. But Miku years later still has not gotten over it and is crying, and it just kind of feels like she's left in such a bad place that it's just sort of like, oh wow, this character I really liked and was cheering on, it gets, like, the worst ending ever. I kind of wish she had, like, gone to France and stayed there to study, you know, culinary arts or something like that. And I feel like there's more points that I sort of wrote over in the blue, but I'm kind of forgetting it on the spot, because again, I wanted to do this based on my memory rather than rereading the whole plot on, like, Wikipedia and then making notes, because this is sort of the psychology that I'm going into this with. But as I read over it one more time, so she's the first one he seems to recognize, which is, again, very, like, thematically important. The show ends with him on a date with her, and we also get to see on that date how they make a cute couple, and he seems happy and he seems to actually be having fun, etc. The camera always pans to her when we learn that he might not be able to help study or something, and it almost seems the other girls sort of go to comfort Miku, and they have the whole moment of her sleeping in the bed with him, and she's the first he wins over. And I feel like there's one other, but I'm sure I'll bring it up at some point when we're actually going over each of the volumes of the books. But my only other big thing beyond being bothered by the fact that all the characters seem so like depressed at the end of the story, and especially since Yotsuba runs away from him and doesn't seem to fully appreciate like what she got that all the other girls didn't get, is again, I just sort of want to emphasize how much this feels like it's one of the possible endings and isn't necessarily canonical. I actually ended up playing through one of the visual novels so spoilers for the visual novel warning here, but I ended up playing one of the visual novels after I finished the anime. And it lets you pick any of the girls, and so it lets you go through that last moment in the movie where they're all sitting in one of the classrooms, and whichever one he goes into is the girl he picks. And you can actually pick any of the girls, and you can actually see how they would have reacted to him picking them. And again, maybe I'm biased towards Miku, but I did the Miku playthrough, and I swear it just felt more natural. Like it felt like where the story wanted to go. And as I said that reminds me of like, so as someone who's written a lot and has, worked with a lot of writers and done workshops, and, I have friends who've published books, etc. And I published a lot of writing too, under a pen name, so you won't be able to find it. But I feel like there's this thing where sometimes a writer will start writing a novel with something that really excites them. And so, maybe it's a twist and they're like, oh, that's so cool. I have this whole story idea about this guy and his friend who go on this epic journey to defeat the evil wizard. But then at the end, it's revealed that the friend the whole time actually was the evil wizard. And it's this big twist, and they get all excited about that exciting moment that sort of makes, them excited. And so they write. But as they write the story, it starts to evolve as they start to develop the characters more than just that initial outline. And often they sometimes have to sacrifice that first thing that excited them, and they're like, man, now that I've written 3/4 of the book, I realize that the twist at the ending feels really cheap, or I realize that the twist just doesn't work with the way I developed the characters. And my personal fan theory with the Quintessential Quintuplets is that the author thought it would be cool to subvert our expectations and have the girl be Yotsuba. So I do think he always planned on it being Yotsuba. But in order to make sure that it didn't become too obvious, he purposely developed red herrings. So Miku, Nino, Itsuga, he built them all up as red herrings, so it was sort of like, ooh, which one could it be? Which one could it be? But I think that he accidentally went a little too hard with some of them, namely Miku and Ichika, where I feel like he really built them up as red herrings, so much so that I'd like to think that there was a moment when he was writing where he was like, oh shoot, I sort of built Miku up to be the perfect rival to Yotsuba, so much so that it almost feels like he should end up with Miku. But since he had planned it to be Yotsuba, he was like, well, I still have to end it with Yotsuba. So he then just stuck with his initial idea, which is a big thing that a lot of people are saying with Game of Thrones, where people think that the ending of the book series is how the show ended, and George basically saw that everyone hated the show ending, and now he can't finish the books because that was the ending he planned. And that's sort of my theory, but I'm hoping that theory will be disproven through the manga and as I read the actual original source material, because ultimately I'm sort of bummed that the series ended on a movie rather than another season, because things just sort of felt rushed, and like I said, that whole ending scene with the wedding just felt kind of weird and like tonally like it was not the right direction. But I think I've now ranted for way too long about this, so I'm gonna wrap this up. So my next video will most likely be about volume 1. I'm hoping to get that out either later this week or early next week, so if you enjoyed this extremely niche and in-depth rant about the quintessential quintuplets, feel free to subscribe so you can be notified when the next episode goes out. I think this might literally end up being like a 15-part series if I do one episode per volume. We'll see how it goes, but yeah, let me know in the comments which girl you were rooting for if you're familiar with the IP, and let me know why you think Miku is the best, because I feel like I'll die on this hill that all of the story conventions and all of the tropes and archetypes and character development and the way, plot goes, it should have been Miku, not just because I liked her personality, but because of the role she played in the story. So, yeah. I hope you guys all enjoyed this, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!